أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. وأعوذ به من شر نفسي إن النفس لأمارة بالسوء إلا ما رحم ربي. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق وخاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين، سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المطهرين المكرمين. السلام عليك سيدي ومولاي يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات. Respected elders, sisters and brothers, Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. This is the oldest and the first Maqtal of Imam Al Hussein alayhi salam. It is a source by which scholars, zakirs, reciters, poets as well as others utilize in order to present what happened on the 10th of Muharram. The analysis of this book is essential for you and I to answer the question as to how do we deal with the literature related to Ashura and the story of the sacrifice of the grandson of the Holy Prophet. Maqtal al-Hussein by Lut ibn Yahya ibn Sa'id Abi Mikhnaf, otherwise known as the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf, is considered to be the oldest surviving book of Maqtal of Ashura, the story of the epic sacrifice of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. There's no doubt that throughout the world today, you'll find majalis taking place in different parts of the planet. You have majalis, for example, in Islamabad. You have majalis in Stockholm. You have majalis in Buenos Aires. You have majalis in Las Vegas. The idea that emerges is that the mentioning of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the gathering relating to the 10th of Muharram, is a global phenomenon. Year by year it increases. And the story of the Shahada of the Imam, his companions and his Ahl al-Bayt motivates, galvanizes, inspires so many people. Not only because of the fact that it's a historical narrative, it relates to the lives of many people, but the details of what happened on that day and what happened before as well as after creates a sense of, indeed, emotion, creates a sense of connection. Every year we listen to the story of Ashura as if we've never listened to it before. There is an interest, there is a magnet that draws us towards these particular stories of what happened on that day, before and after. That's why you find many people would come forward and be able to relate to what happened on that day. But the story of Ashura, where did we get it from? In other words, many of you will listen to majalis. Many of you will listen on the 10th of Muharram to the story of the martyrdom of the Imam. Yet the question is, what is the source of these particular narratives? Where did they originate from? Because we know the story of likes of Al-Hurr ibn Yazid. We have heard about Habib ibn Mudahir. We know about some of the members of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam and their martyrdom. Ali al-Akbar, Al-Qasim, Aun Muhammad, Abbas alayhi salam. These individuals are known. But I tell you, have you heard of, for example, a particular person by the name of Suwayd ibn Umru? Is this a name that you are aware of? Suwayd ibn Umru is a heroic shaheed of Karbala. Do you know what happened to this Suwayd? This individual fought on the 10th of Muharram. When he was fighting, he got injured and became unconscious. The battle was over. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was martyred, yet he was still alive. He gained his consciousness and began to move and stood up and saw that they said, لَقَدْ قُتِلَ الْحُسَيْنِ Hussein has been killed. He became enraged with anger. He is filled with injuries. He picks up a knife, begins to run towards the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad. He fights, and then he is martyred. The likes of, for example, a man by the name of Yazid ibn Thubayt al-Basri. These are names that perhaps you and I are not accustomed to. They're not household names. Yet the 10th of Muharram has so many heroic examples that perhaps we have not reflected upon. Who is this man? This man, when he heard Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is coming to Mecca, he said, I will go and what? I will go and visit him to say to him, I will fight. Because he lived in Basra, he had 10 sons. He said to his sons, would you fight with Imam al-Hussein? 2 out of his 10 sons said, we will. How many? 2. One is called Abdullah and the other is called Ubaidullah. They came with him. When he reached Mecca, he said, where is Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam? They said to him, he's staying in a particular house. Imam al-Hussein heard that this man, Yazid ibn Thubayt, is coming to visit him. He said, no, I will go and visit him. Because he's coming from Basra. So Imam went to the house of Yazid ibn Thubayt. Yazid ibn Thubayt went to the house of the Imam. They both missed each other. So Imam said, where is he? They said, Yabna Rasulillah, he's gone to see you. And when that man went to see Imam, he said, where is Imam al-Hussein? They said, he's gone to meet you. Subhanallah. So Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam makes his way back. They meet in the middle. And then he recites this beautiful verse in the Holy Quran. قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا. He says, by the mercy and the grace of Allah, I need to be happy. Because I've now met my Imam. He said to him, Yabna Rasulillah, I'm here to fight. Here are my 2 sons. They were both martyred on the 10th of Muharram, and he attained Shahada. There's another companion. There are so many of these that we hear in the story of the 10th of Muharram that inspire us. A man by the name of Burayr al-Hamadani. Burayr al-Hamadani, a great scholar. Yes, an individual who's a muhaddith, a person who is a reciter of the Quran. Burayr comes on the day of Ashura and speaks to Umar ibn Sa'ad. Says, oh, Umar ibn Sa'ad, what is it that you're doing? He said, why don't you say salam to me? First say salam. Burayr said, you do not deserve the salam of a Muslim. Umar ibn Sa'ad said to him, why? He said, look at this. The dogs and the pigs, they drink from the water, and you do not allow the grandson of the Prophet to drink? How dare you? Yes. At that moment, Umar ibn Sa'ad was what? Ashamed, because Burayr was a very well-established individual from Kufa. So he put his head down in shame. Later, Burayr al-Hamadani comes forward to fight an individual by the name of Yazid ibn Maqtal. He comes. Yazid ibn Maqtal looks at him and says, what are you talking about? Because he was advising the army of Yazid so much. So Yazid said, stop talking. Burayr said, how about we ask Allah and do mubahala? So the school of Ahl al-Bayt has no fear when it comes to what? Malediction, mubahala. He said to him, very well. Yeah, Burayr raised his hand and said, Ya Allah, the one who is wrong amongst us, kill him. Then they began to fight, and Burayr cut the other person in half and sent him to where? To Jahannam. The idea that emerges is, these stories are found where? They are found in books known as Maqatil. You and I have heard from Majlis, Maqtal. Maqtal. We refer to Arbabul Maqatil, the people of the Maqtals, isn't it? One of those Maqtals that need to be looked at is the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf. Why? Because many times we refer to these particular names from the minbar and people don't know what we're talking about. They say, yes, I've heard of Abi Mikhnaf, but who on earth is he? Where did he come from? What is his Maqtal all about? Is this important? Of course it's important. Because when we remember Ashura, we must look at the sources of Ashura. We must investigate how we have attained what has happened on that day, or at least the best possible way in order to construct an image of what happened on that day. The Imam Hussein alayhi salam shrine published a wonderful 3-volume encyclopedia in 2019. They compiled, for the first time in history, the entire names of all the maqtals that have been written since the 10th of Muharram. How many maqtals do we have today? They say 234 books of maqtal have been written. And they include references to the story of Imam Al Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala that have not necessarily been published as a book or a maqtal. Like for example, in Sheikh Mufid's Irshad, he discusses in details Ashura, but that was not published as a separate book. How many maqtals? 234 they say, yes? In English today, somebody asks, I want to know the story of Ashura. Are there maqtals in English? Which ones are available? For example, the most perhaps common one that's available online for people to download is Maqtal al-Hussein by Ibn al-Muqarram. Yes, this particular Maqtal, yes, al-Muqarram, he has quite contemporary, and he has written a Maqtal which has been translated in English. Nafs al-Mahmum, yes, is also another one by Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi. You find recently there is a book known as The Chronicles of Imam al-Hussein by Ayatollah Ray Shahri, who is the author of Mizan al-Hikmah, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi. He passed away this year. Chronicles of Imam al-Hussein has been translated in English, and it is available for people to refer to. Similarly, you have another book that's published by Ansarian Publications. It's called Imam al-Hussein, The Tragic Saga of Karbala by Ali Nazari. These are mainly what's available in English, but there are other books that discuss the story of Imam al-Hussein, but not in a maqtal form, not in a chronological way. Like for example, Ayatollah Muhammad Sadiq has a book known as From Medina to Karbala in the words of Imam al-Hussein. This is an excellent book that discusses everything that Imam alayhi salam said. The idea that emerges is that when it comes to this particular discussion, it's key. It is not the easiest of subjects to discuss. Hence, it's the first time discussed in the English language. Yes, this idea of Abi Mikhnaf and his Maqtal needs to be understood. Why? Because the member of Imam al-Hussein seeks to serve two purposes. Please pay attention to this. The member of Imam al-Hussein seeks to elevate the individual in terms of their iman, number one. Number two, in terms of knowledge. That when you and I attend a majlis, it should be something that increases our knowledge, increases our understanding about many of the aspects related to what? Related to this particular story. And that's why it is of the utmost importance that we pay attention and we start to unravel some of the features related to the oldest and the what? And the first Maqtal. Because somebody asks the question, who is the first to write the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and what happened in Karbala? This, according to many of the historians, was the companion of Imam Ali alayhi salam by the name of Asbagh ibn Nubata. Asbagh ibn Nubata wrote some narrations regarding what happened on the day of Ashura, but it was lost. Asbagh ibn Nubata, we don't know the date by which he died, but he died in the 2nd century Hijrah. There is another individual, yes, who indeed was amongst those who wrote about the 10th of Muharram. His name is Jabir al-Ju'fi. He died in the year 128 after Hijrah. How many years after Ashura? About 60 years. Jabir al-Ju'fi was a companion of Imam Mohammed al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Jabir al-Ju'fi wrote about Karbala, wrote about the story of the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. Because you ask me, what does Maqtal mean? Maqtal comes from qatl, comes from the killing. So the idea behind the Maqtal is it details what happened at the time of the killing of the Imam. But of course, the historians come forward and place other significant detail with regarding to Ashura. These two are lost. We don't have them today. There is no trace of them whatsoever. However, when you come to this particular individual, Abi Mikhnaf, he died in the year 158 after Hijrah. 158 after Hijrah. His compilation, his Maqtal, some of it is what is available today. That's why it's considered the oldest Maqtal that we have at our disposal today. And therefore deserves a thorough investigation and analysis. An analysis that requires your attention and patience, because it will be technical. We will delve into some of the areas of history and historiography in order to unravel some of the features of this Maqtal and ask a number of questions as follows. How did the event of Karbala reach us today? What are the sources in which we received the information relating to Karbala? Number one. Number two, this Abi Mikhnaf, what is his historiography? His birth, for example, was he a Shi'i or not? How did he compile the Maqtal of his? Number three, do we trust it or not? Is it reliable or not? Do we take everything in it or not? Is there different versions of it? Is it translated to English or not? Number four, this is great importance. Number four, how do we look at riwayat or stories that are mentioned on the minbar about Karbala? How do we assess it? Do we accept everything? Do we reject most things? Do we present it to aql? Do we present it to certain features and conditions? This is of the utmost importance in order for us to appreciate. And number five, what are examples of these tools that we can utilize in analyzing some stories that we have heard about Ashura, which may not be necessarily true? In the hope that we are inspired in the wonderful movement of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Husayn, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Somebody may ask you today, you gather in majalis, you hear the musibah, you cry, you beat your chests about the event that happened 1400 years ago. How did you receive this information? Because I tell you, you will not find perhaps an incident in history as detailed presented today as Ashura and Karbala. There is so much detail presented regarding the 10th of Muharram. Somebody may ask you, how did you reach this particular information reach you? There are a number of ways in which this reached us. Amongst them, number one, in addition to the books of Maqtal, is eyewitness accounts. What do we mean? There are those who survived Ashura, those who were with Imam al-Hussein and were not killed. Yes? For example, there is a man by the name of Al-Dhahhak ibn Abdullah. Many names will be mentioned today. The hope that you will actually store them in the back of your memory so that you kind of somehow remember these people. Al-Dhahhak was a companion of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He said to him, Ya ibn Rasulillah, I have a deal with you. He said, what is the deal? He said, I will fight with you until there's no one left or very few people left. Do you give me permission then to leave you? Imam said, yes, you can go. No problem. Imam alayhi salam said to his companions the eve of Ashura, he said, you can all go. Yes, I absolve you of the oath of loyalty that you gave me. No problem. So Al-Dhahhak fought, killed 2 or 3 people. Very few were left with Imam al-Hussein. He then said, it's time for me to go. He went, he took his horse, he had hidden his horse. He picked up his horse and he left Karbala. This is su'a tawfiq. Su'a tawfiq means bad luck, in other words, yes? In other words, he would have attained shahada. However, his presence was still good in the idea that given that he was given permission to leave from Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he is considered an eyewitness to the tragedy. So he reported a number of things about what he saw, about what he encountered on the plains of Karbala. Similarly, the members of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam, they are considered eyewitness accounts. You have people who are historians who were there, like Humayd ibn Muslim or Hamid ibn Muslim. This is a name most of us have come to know from the minbar. How many times you heard Maulanas or ulama or dhakirin, they say to you, Hamid ibn Muslim said, Hamid ibn Muslim narrated. Yes, this is a very interesting figure when you study his biography, because some say he was neutral. In fact, he is considered to be by many scholars a follower of the Ahl al-Bayt. But what he did on the day of Ashura, he intervened in some cases to stop further suffering falling on the Ahl al-Bayt. Like for example, Shimr was about to strike Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. Humayd ibn Muslim or Hamid, there's a dispute about his name. He stopped Shimr and said, you have already killed his father. Why are you killing him too? The plan was to burn all the tents entirely and not leave any particular tent. It is said, according to historians, that he was amongst those who asked that some tents are not burnt entirely, for example. Yes. Hamid or Humayd ibn Muslim was a man who was a historian. He reported, you know what happened to him? It is said later he joined the Tawabun movement, the penitents who felt guilty from Kufa. They rose against Ubaydullah bin Ziyad. When he joined the Tawabun, later he wanted to join Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, but he was scared. Mukhtar said, anyone who is in Karbala and did not support Hussein, bring him to me. Yes? So he ran away. Hamid ibn Muslim would run away and not want to be with Mukhtar, despite riwayat telling us that he met Mukhtar in the prison. Yes? This is one example of people who narrated these. Another is what? Another is the ziyarah literature that we have today. How many of you have read Ziyaratul Nahiya al-Muqaddasa? Sublime, wonderful ziyarah. It's like a Maqtal. It's narrated from the 12th Imam, Sahib al-Asr wa al-Zaman, al-Mahdi al-Muntadhar, Ajjal Allah Ta'ala farajah. Can you imagine reciting a ziyarah which is narrated from the 12th Imam about what happened on the day of Ashura? Imam addresses his grandfather. He talks about some of the details that happened on the plains of Karbala. It's a very vivid, graphic description in Ziyaratul Nahiya al-Muqaddasa. Read it tonight if you can. Read it in these 10 nights if it's possible. Yes, Ziyaratul Nahiya is available in English, is available in Farsi, is available in different languages, for you to reflect about what is likely to be presented from the Imam alayhi salam. So that's a source for you and I also to take about what happened on the day of Ashura. Question, this Abi Mikhnaf, some people call him Abi Mukhnaf. That's incorrect. It's Mikhnaf with a kasra. Yes, this Abi Mikhnaf, who is he? How did he reach this particular stage? Yes, we are told that his great grandfather, his name was what? His name was Mikhnaf. Yes. And he was a companion of the Holy Prophet Rasul al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Not only was the great grandfather of Abi Mikhnaf a companion of the Prophet, but he was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He would be given the governorship of a number of cities at the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Hamadan and Isfahan. He would be in charge of these particular places, placed in there on behalf of whom? The commander of the faithful. He was therefore considered a Sahabi. Why? Of Amir al-Mu'mineen, because he fought alongside him in Jabal and Siffin. Jamal and Siffin, he was fighting alongside Amir al-Mu'mineen. The father of Abi Mikhnaf is considered a Sahabi of the Ahl al-Bayt as well. Meaning what? Meaning that some say, some of the ulama come forward and say that he was serving Ali Muhammad. He was serving Amir al-Mu'mineen and a number of other Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt. When was Abi Mikhnaf born? He was born in the 50s after Hijrah. So he was alive when Ashura happened. Most likely. We don't know exactly when he was born, but it's very likely that he was alive when the 10th of Muharram 61 AH took place. What was his profession? Was he Shi'i or not? This is a major dispute, because today Abi Mikhnaf is respected by Sunnis and Shias. This man who's written a Maqtal of Imam al-Hussein, many of the brothers and sisters from the Ahl al-Sunnah consider him to be a historian who is respected. They consider his narrations outside history to be weak. They don't take his narrations. Why? They say he is a Shi'i. They don't call him Rafidi. Why? Because he talked about Saqifa, right? But he does not go even further into some of the aqaidi issues, some of the doctrines of the school of Ahl al-Bayt. So they label him as Shi'i. The Shia say he's not Shi'i. Many of our ulama say that when it comes to Abi Mikhnaf, he's a historian who dedicated his life to history only. How many books did he write? 50. 50 books he wrote, yes? He wrote, for example, the Maqtal of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He wrote the Maqtal of Imam Al-Hasan alayhi salam. He wrote about Jamal and Siffin and Nahrawan. Each he would write a complete book about. He dedicated his life to history. He was not concerned about Aqidah. This poses an important question. Who was a Shi'i at that time? Who? If Abi Mikhnaf was not a Shi'i in the sense or the definition that you and I are accustomed to, who is considered a Shi'i? What's interesting is some of our ulama, like Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, Hafidahullah, today he says there are 5 levels of tashayyu' at that time. 5 degrees. Number 1, geographical. He says you will be a geographical Shia. Just because you live amongst the Shia and you just with them, you're considered a Shi'i. Number 1. The other type of Shi'i, he said, Shi'i by inheritance. Your parents were Shi'i and you were then considered a follower of the Ahl al-Bayt. A third type of Shi'i was the one who is called verbal. Verbal Shi'i means what? He's a lover of Ahl al-Bayt. And this was a lot of them. A lot of those who claimed to be Shia or people today understood them to be, they were those who expressed their love and loyalty towards Ali Muhammad. Because a group of people came once to visit Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam said, who are these people? They said, Yabna Rasulillah, they are your Shia. He said, I'm not interested. They came back again. Again. How many times they came? 40 days. Imam would not see them. He would not see them. Every time he asks, who are they? They come to them. They say to the Imam, we are your Shia. Eventually, yes, they said on the 40th day, tell the Imam, we are your lovers. He said, now I'll see you. You think this is harsh? Imam sat them down and said, I do not see the sign of the Shia on your foreheads, on your faces. I do not see that. Now I will make it up for you, he said. These 40 times we will meet now. But you claim something that you're not. Yes? So there is this mahabbat, this love, but this love was only verbal. Subhanallah. Amazing. Today, it could be argued there is a number of individuals who are in that category. Don't you agree? There are those you speak to them and they are what? I call them part-time Shias. You'll only see them in Ashura. The rest of the time, nowhere to be seen, yes? In the idea, the adherence to the faith is non-existent, right? They're only present in gatherings or they uphold certain principles of the religion whenever they choose, whenever they want, isn't it? Or they pick and choose when it comes to faith and what they practice and what they don't. Right? And this is the idea that existed at that time and exists today as well. Yes? The fourth category of those who are Shia are marginal. Marginal are those who not only profess their love, but they adhere to some principles. But they fall in many of the areas. Then the fifth, he says, is a true Shi'i, a true follower of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam, who is muti', who is submissive. This is the most important. Today, we will discuss in one of the nights regarding the Islamic dress code of hijab. The question is, somebody today who asks you, are you as a Muslim somebody who has a choice to practice your faith or not? Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us free will. But ultimately, we have an obligation because we must submit to the will of Allah and we must submit to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today, what has become sometimes of our treatment of religion is what? Like a buffet. I pick and choose what I like. Sometimes I also deal with religion like microwave. You know the microwave? Too much mentioning of food today. There's no problem, you've already had food. Microwave meaning what? Meaning that I want everything ready-made and I place it and I just want it quickly. I don't want to work hard for it. Maulana, is there a loophole for khums? Is there a loophole for this? Is there this? I want to be chilling in life. I don't want to work hard. I don't want to struggle. Give me some shortcut. Everybody wants religion. Do you want a quick jump to Jannah? It comes through hard work, some dedication, blood and sweat. You've got to give it some hard work. You know, you expect, Maulana, why can't I have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Everybody else has. Maulana, why can't I take cannabis? Everybody else has. Maulana, I want to listen to this music. Why is my friend? Maulana, but I want to go to Jannah. You want all this in Jannah? Pick your sides. Yes? In the idea that it has to have some sacrifice. Pain is good. You must feel the pain. That you can't do certain things. Allah doesn't want you to do certain things because it's not good for you. Some of the struggle of our youth is like this, yes? In the idea that they want everything that others do, they can't do, they want it, yet at the same time, they want to be saved on the day of Qiyamah, yes. Ultimately, there needs to be sacrifice and hard work. And that's why this Abi Mikhnaf is considered to be a lover of Ahlul Bayt, but not necessarily the Shi'i at the theological level, at the individual. Why? He didn't necessarily express his Aqidah. He didn't, because he was somebody who was in Iraq writing about Kufa, writing about the history of Iraq. He was very concerned about those particular aspects. Why is his Maqtal very important? Let me just briefly tell you the reasons why his Maqtal is important. Number one, because he lived close to the event of Karbala. And naturally, if you have something close to an event, you will consider it to be a bit more reliable, don't you? Yes? He was within 100 years. And what did he do? He also spoke to people who were there in Karbala. He spoke to them. Like who? You've heard of Hani ibn Urwa, radwanullahi ta'ala alayhi, yes? Hani ibn Urwa was a shaheed who attained shahada either on the same day or the next, or the day before Muslim ibn Aqil. Hani ibn Urwa supported Muslim ibn Aqil in Kufa, isn't it? The son of Hani, Yahya ibn Hani ibn Urwa, unfortunately, he was compelled and forced by his maternal uncle, Amr ibn Hajjaj al-Yazdi, to go to Karbala, witness in the campsite of Yazid. Who is this? The son of Hani ibn Urwa, the shaheed. Yes? Yahya ibn Hani is one of those who spoke to Abi Mikhnaf and gave him details. And Abi Mikhnaf quotes him directly. Yes? And says, I spoke to him and he told me the following. Which is what? Reassuring when you sometimes hear from someone who is there in the battlefield itself. Who else did he speak to? He spoke to the wife of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, Dalham. Abi Mikhnaf himself, the historian, would speak to the wife of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, take information from her. What else did he do? He spoke to people who were there in Karbala. Right? So he didn't speak to Humayd ibn Muslim directly. He spoke to him through another individual. He spoke to a man by the name of Aqba ibn Sam'an. Now, who is Aqba ibn Sam'an? He was the slave of Ar-Rabab, the wife of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. She had a slave. He was there in Karbala. He was captured as a prisoner. Later, Yazid frees him. Frees Aqba. Right? And he becomes an eyewitness. Right? He speaks to someone who then speaks to Abi Mikhnaf. So therefore, he had this particular relationship. Similarly, they say his maqtal is important. Why? Because that's his job. He wasn't concerned about anything other than history. Because a historian writing a maqtal is what? Better than a theologian writing a maqtal. That's his expertise. That's his area of development. And that's why he is given what? Credit to this. Ayatullah Khu'i, rahmatullahi alayhi, considers him thiqah, reliable. Najashi, who is another of our great scholars in the works of, or in the field of Rijal, or the assessment of the narrators of Hadith, considers him also to be a reliable person. But there is a problem. We don't have his maqtal today. Say to me, all this discussion, and we don't have his maqtal? What happened is that all the 50 books of Abi Mikhnaf were lost. However, Some historians, what they did was they quoted from Abi Mikhnaf, like Tabari, like Sheikh Al-Mufid. They, in their works, said Abi Mikhnaf said this. And that is why what happened was, two versions of his Maqtal were produced. One fairly reliable, one full of inaccuracies. Unfortunately, they're both called Maqtal Abi Mikhnaf. Please pay attention to this, because some of the stories you hear on the minbar may not necessarily be from the right Maqtal. Let me elaborate. What do we mean? We find that when Tabari came forward, he quoted 118 riwayat from Abi Mikhnaf. Tabari, very well-known historian, who has his Tarikh al-Tabari, yes. When he quotes 118 riwayat, this Tabari was very inclined towards the Abbasids. He had an Abbasid, mentality. So the Abbasids, what did they want to do? They wanted to highlight the fact that Karbala was tragic. Karbala was something that breaks the heart. But they did not allow any reference to any divine connection of Karbala. Meaning that they did not wish anything to be mentioned that says Imam alayhi salam moved in accordance with the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, we have narrations of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam that says رضا الله رضانا أهل البيت نصبر على قضائه ويوفينا أجور الصابرين. That our pleasure is the pleasure of Allah. We are patient by His decree and Allah will reward us accordingly. This is not found in Tabari, because it doesn't go along with his worldview or the Abbasids' philosophy to present Karbala as a movement that was worldly. And then they say that he did not achieve his objectives. The Abbasids wanted to push this agenda that Hussein ibn Ali was killed, but it was not something that fulfilled the goal that he wished to achieve, right? So they take away anything related to the mission of Imam alayhi salam that is divine. What happened therefore was that the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf was fabricated. People placed stuff in it, right? And claimed that this was from Abi Mikhnaf, and took some of the narrations from Tabari and some others. And this book began to be published and available even today. So you ask me, what are the problems with this book? There are a number of stories found there that I have heard mentioned in the minbar. Someone says, how do I know if this particular book is a fabricated one? There are two signs, and I'll quickly tell you. In this book, the first thing that says was, حدثنا هشام ibn Muhammad. Hisham ibn Muhammad was a student of Abi Mikhnaf. It can't be that Abi Mikhnaf says that what? I was learning from my student. Number one. Number two, he says, روى الكليني in his Maqtal. Kulayni came 100 years after Abi Mikhnaf. How can Abi Mikhnaf say that I am narrating from Al-Kulayni? Yes? These are all signs that this is fabricated, right? What kind of stories exist? Let me quickly tell you. What kind of stories exist in this book? That sometimes, unfortunately, some dhakirs, not ulama, even though ulama may make mistakes, yes? Some dhakir, this is why it's very important that sometimes you and I hear a story from the minbar about Imam al-Hussein, or Karbala, or Ashura. Immediately, we must not immediately think that's it, that's what happened. Sometimes what happens is, one Maulana mentions a story on the minbar, and all of a sudden everyone begins to mention it. It's as if it's established, yes? What are examples of fabricated stories in the wrong Abi Mikhnaf Maqtal? For example, in the story of Muslim ibn Aqil, how many times we've heard that he fell in a ditch? Have you remember this? Where he fell into a ditch that they had planted and covered, and he fell into it, and that's how they captured him. This is false. This is in the Abi Mikhnaf one that is distorted, not found anywhere else. How many times you hear it from the minbar? The idea that emerges is what? There are a number of other examples. For example, alhamdulillah, this story is not very common because people think it's clearly illogical. But in the distorted Abi Mikhnaf Maqtal, he says that what? That Imam al-Hussein received the news of the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil and Had bin Urwa, decided to go back to Medina. Went back to Medina, right? And he then what? Did ziyarah of the Holy Prophet. After he received the news of Muslim ibn Aqil, then he left again, right? So these kind of distortions exist. then how do we know that the version that is more cleansed, so to speak, is what we should be reading? Because some of our ulama have worked on it. Yes, Sheikh Al-Gharawi, yes, is an individual, one of our scholars. He came, and what did he do? He looked at these narrations. He looked at mostly what Sheikh Al-Mufid had narrated from Abi Mikhnaf, and he published the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf, which is today what is translated to English. Alhamdulillah, yes. The translated version of the Maqtal of Abi Mikhnaf is the one that has been somehow authenticated in as far as not being the version that has all these problematic kind of narrations. And that's why we find we find that this is an important text in the analysis of looking at what happened in Ashura. However, is this all authentic? So today you say to me, mashallah, Ibn Abi Mikhnaf is the oldest Maqtal. You should all know his name by now very well. Yes, he has this particular book. At least part of his Maqtal is survived through the works of other ulama. It's been investigated. It's been collaborated. Somehow, the good narrations presented. Is it all accurate? No. Nobody says that this Maqtal is entirely correct. There is likelihood that some of these narrations need to be Need to be looked at, need to be analyzed. Someone asked the question, how do I know? When I hear from a majlis, from the mimbar, the story of what happened to a particular companion, or Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam, or for example, Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, how do I know if this is true or not? Today we have an issue. Let's be honest. Majalis are amazing. But sometimes what happens is people get carried away. And in order to create a sense of grief, there is no doubt that some distortions and fabrications have taken place throughout history when it comes to the story of Abu Abdullah and Ashura. No doubt. You ask me a question, is there a system by which I can verify what is true and what is not true? This is an important question, right? I want a measure. I want a barometer, something that gives me a system by which I can find out this is something I accept or not. Because, please be wary of this. There are those who sit under the mimbar, hear a riwayah and say, this doesn't make sense to me, I reject it. This is wrong. Not everything has to make sense to you. Sometimes we want to impose our understanding on history. Sometimes we want to impose something that we think it's right. Oh, this should have happened on historical events. No. And the opposite is true too. Not everything that is always mentioned is necessarily true. So, how do we look at this? There are 5 important criteria. Please pay attention to this so that we are aware of what? Of the ways in which we can somehow get a clarity about some of the riwayat related to the 10th of Muharram. They say, our ulama say, when these are combined, or some of these are combined, we can be assured at least to what? To come to the conclusion that we accept it. One thing before we mention these 5, and that is very important. We do not deal with history the way we deal with fiqh. Meaning what? If a riwayah in history is weak, for example, the chain is broken, mursala, this doesn't mean we reject it. In jurisprudence, ulama of fiqh, they have very strict, stringent rules in accepting narrations so that you and I practice our faith brilliantly, as best as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to. Do you agree? In history, if we use the same criteria, most of the information we have today about Karbala, we cannot use. One of our great historians and ulama, say Ja'far Murtada al-Amili, rahmatullahi alayh, he's written a wonderful biography of the Holy Prophet, over 40 volumes, and Amir al-Mu'mineen, yes, he says if you use the same criteria, the only thing that becomes a fact is that Imam al-Hussein was martyred on the 10th of Muharram. That's it. Because today you ask, and some people you will hear on YouTube, they tell you this riwayah is weak, therefore we do not mention it on the minbar, this story. Who told you just because it's weak is not necessarily something that we should follow? Because this is not fiqh, how to pray and fast and hajj and zakat and khums. There are different criteria applied to history. Please understand this. We must raise the level of our communities in understanding how we deal with literature, with hadith, with different narrations that exist in history. Yes? So, what are the criteria that we use? Number one, that the source of this narration, the closer it is to the event of Karbala, the better. The closer it is, chronologically or the time, the date-wise, we accept it more. Number two, it needs to be a riwayah that perhaps is mentioned by established scholars. If established scholars generally mention this, even if the riwayah is weak, it can be what? It can be utilized. Number three, it needs to be a riwayah that has been narrated from the enemy of Ahl al-Bayt praising Ahl al-Bayt. Because the enemy of Ahl al-Bayt would not mention something praising Ali Muhammad. Yes. And if they have, that means it's a criteria that's likely to be something that we accept. Number four, there shouldn't be in the chain of narrations a liar, somebody who fabricates in the chain of narrations. And number five, this is very important. Please pay attention to this. This to me is one of the most important criteria for accepting a narration or not. Anything related to a ma'soom or those around the ma'soomeen on the second level, like Sayyida Zainab and Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas salamullahi alayhim, it must not be in any shape or form contradictory to the values of the Quran, their qualities, or for example, question the isma of the ma'soomeen. This is very, very important. Yes? These five have been used by many scholars to decipher, filter out, to look at these narrations and stories and come with a particular conclusion. Let's put them in practice finally. Yes, it's not necessarily always good just to give theory. Let's put it in practice. Yes, there is a story mentioned in Maqtal, a number of Maqtals. For example, the Maqtal of Muharram, that's widely used. Yes. And I forgot to mention that there is a Maqtal that's been translated recently by our dear friend and colleague Sheikh Dr. Osama Al-Attar, yes, of Maqtal of Sheikh Zahra Al-Ka'bi. Also a small booklet available that people can purchase as well and be able to combine these to be able to get an idea of what happened on the 10th of Muharram. Here is a story that's mentioned in some of these Maqtals. They say, and please pay attention to this, they say Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura came towards the riverbank of Furat after all his Sahaba and family members have been martyred. He came down to drink some water. He said to his horse, drink. His horse moved his head to say that it will not drink. There's nothing so far wrong. But then he heard someone from the campsite of Yazid who said, Ya Hussein, do you drink water and your family are being attacked? And so the riwayah in the Maqtal says, Imam alayhi salam did not drink and threw the water and rushed back to his campsite. This is something that's mentioned on the minbar across the Shia world. There is a problem with this riwayah. What is the problem in this riwayah? It is subjecting Abu Abdullah to what? To the idea that he was careless about his family members, that he was concerned about drinking water, that an enemy says to him, you are concerned with drinking water and we are attacking your family. To me and to many scholars, it puts Imam al-Hussein's isma into huge question mark. Yes? Yet, it's mentioned on the minbar. You and I have a responsibility. If throughout your lives, you're sitting and you hear a majlis, or a musibah, or a line of poetry, or anything that perhaps you are not comfortable with, I am not saying you should reject it immediately. You should investigate at the very least. Ask the reciter, ask the scholar, can I know the reference from this? Can I know how this came about? Where else can I find about this? Yes, it's of the utmost importance, and we have some degree of academic accountability in some respects. As long as these criteria are somehow adhered to, then we can, for example, take some of these narrations. Another final example I'd like to give you is this. How many of you have heard about the story of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn? Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, many will tell you, was a man who was Uthmani. Meaning, he followed the third Khalifa Uthman ibn Affan. They say to you that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was traveling to Karbala and whom Zuhair ibn al-Qayn was trying to avoid him. Eventually, they both ended up in the same place. Imam alayhi salam went to his tent, convinced him. This man then divorces his wife and says, I will be with you, Ya Hussein. That's the story most of the Shia have heard. But there are serious problems with this story. Serious problems. Yes? An investigation of the sources of this particular narration highlights flaws that needs to be looked at. I'll just give you very briefly the problems that exist in this narration. It is narrated by an individual, yes, who is considered to be unreliable. It is narrated by a man by the name of As-Siddi, who was fearful at the time of Hajjaj, so therefore he wrote it. It is what? It is an accusation labeled at him by an enemy of God by the name of Azra ibn Qais al-Bajali. Let me tell you the story. Tabari says, and this is the only source of the narration, Tabari says that on the day of Ashura, Azra stood in front of Zuhair and said to him, Ya Zuhair, ما كنت عندنا من الشيعة من شيعة هذا البيت إنما كنت عثمانية. We don't know you to be a follower of the Ahl al-Bayt. You were always Uthmani. There is no other reference to this whatsoever. Just an enemy of God labeling this against Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Yes? Similarly, what do we find? We find that the details of the conversation of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam with Zuhair ibn al-Qayn is not found. What did he say to him? What are the ways in which he convinced him? Right? This notion contradicts what Imam al-Hussein said about him in Karbala. What did Imam al-Hussein say in reliable narrations? When Zuhair ibn al-Qayn spoke to the people of Yazid, the army of Yazid, they did not listen. Imam said to them, look at this man. He reminds me of Mu'min Ali Fir'aun. Yes? That this particular individual, what? He has advised them, but they're not taking his advice. What is Imam saying? He's saying Zuhair ibn al-Qayn was in the state of taqiyya. Mu'min Ali Fir'aun was the individual who concealed his faith. Imam alayhi salam was saying, all this time, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn is one of us. Because the praise of Imam alayhi salam to Zuhair ibn al-Qayn is outstanding. Yes? Not just like for an individual who changed sides. He must have been a loyal, because he is considered to be one of the loyal companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Some riwayat I found, Imam Ali taught him some knowledge not given to many others. Like he taught Kumayl ibn Ziyad and Maytham al-Tammar. He taught Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. Yes. Zuhair ibn al-Qayn's position and stance on the 10th of Muharram and the eve of the 10th was not like somebody who just joined a few days ago. Yes? Deep rooted in Iman and Aqidah and Yaqeen. He would say, if I'm burnt 1,000 times, I would still fight for you, O Hussein. The problem is, there are no one else, no Ahl al-Bayt, no Riwayah, nothing other than this that suggests that he was a Uthmani and that he was against Imam al-Hussein and he wanted to run away. However, unfortunately, it became part and parcel of our discussions because it suits some people to say he was not part of the school of Ahl al-Bayt and then he joined. Whereas there are problematic ways in which this is looked at. Therefore, the invitation when it comes to the 10th of Muharram and the Maqtal literature is for you and I to be able to be well versed and understand the literature that exists. At the same time, not necessarily to rush into conclusions, not to be judgmental about certain things, but importantly, to leave it to the experts. Because today, there are those who come to 10th of Muharram and claim to know what's going on. They start to label this to be unreliable and this to be okay and this makes sense and this doesn't. It's of the utmost importance that this is left to those who are experts in this area, who are able to present it in one way. And the final point I'll mention is this, and this is sensitive. If somebody today comes and tells us something that we don't agree about what happened on Ashura day, somebody comes to a conclusion who's an alim or a scholar of deen, somebody who's well versed, well established, comes to a particular conclusion about certain events, for example, on the 9th, or the 7th, or the 10th, or the 11th, or the 40th, whatever conclusion. We must have the patience and the heart not to immediately make them outside the fold of Islam and Tashayyu'. People have become so sensitive about some of these particular suggestions. Yes, sometimes these suggestions may cause confusion amongst the masses, and that is a problem. But at the same time, if there are those who come with particular studies, we may be able to discuss with them. We must not immediately jump to attack certain individuals just because we don't agree with them, because ultimately this is history. His story, history, yes. In the idea that there are versions, there are interpretations. As long as these interpretations do not in any shape or form impact negatively Shuhada'i Karbala, in terms of attacking their personality, who they are, their background, etc. That's why we need to be patient when dealing with this, given the sensitive nature of the story of Karbala. And when we mention Karbala, the 2nd of Muharram comes to mind, isn't it? Because it's the day that the caravan of ishq, the caravan of sacrifice, of dedication reach this land. This land that saw so much, isn't it? This land that you and I crave to go to, that we love to visit. But this land, was it waiting for Aba Abdullah al-Hussein? Riwayat tell us that when he reached this place, he asked people, what is the name of this land? They said to him, this is Ghadiriya. He said, does it have another name? They said to him, this is Nainawa. He said, does it have another name? They said to him, this is the land of Karbala. He said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-karbi wal-bala. Ya Allah, I seek refuge in you from all forms of trials and tribulations. Then he looks at his family members and companions and says a line that truly breaks the heart of the Muwali, the lover of Hussein. He looked at them and says, Huna yuqtalu rijaluna. It's in this place that our men will be killed. Ha huna tusba nusauna. It's here that our women will be enslaved. That's why that particular day was a day in which the family and the companions of the Ahl al-Bayt, they would sit and indeed settle in Karbala. They just arrived in this particular land. I ask you, when was the next time they arrived in Karbala? That was on the close date to the 20th of Safar, the time of Arba'een. Yes, we are told that this individual by the name of Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, he was blind. He had come to visit the grave of his beloved Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. He had a servant by the name of Atiyya. He said to the Atiyya, he said to him, hold my hands. He was blind, Jabir was blind. He says to Atiyya, hold my hands and take me to the grave of my beloved Hussein. When this man Atiyya holds the hands of Jabir, he begins to walk and slowly towards the grave of Imam al-Hussein. But before they reach the grave, a few meters before the grave, Jabir lets go from the hand of Atiyya, rushes towards the grave, throws himself on the grave of Aba Abdullah. He smelt the fragrance of Hussein. He began to rub his cheeks on the grave of Aba Abdullah. He began to cry, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein. Then he said to him, Habibun la yujibu Habiba. I am your beloved, but why is it that you're not answering me, Ya Aba Abdullah? Then he said, maybe the reason is because your cheeks were crushed under the hooves of the horses. Allahu Akbar. That line really breaks the heart of the Muwali, the lover of Aba Abdullah. Jabir knows what happened on the day of Ashura. He says, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, maybe you're not answering me because they crushed your body, they tore your body into pieces. Whilst he's crying, whilst he's reciting the ziyarah, he hears something. He says to his servant, he says to him, Atiyya, go and find out what happened, who is coming. If this is the caravan of Ahl al-Bayt, then you are free in the path of Allah. Atiyya goes to find out. Then he comes and says, oh my master Jabir, rise to welcome the Ahl al-Bayt, the captives of Ali Muhammad. Jabir rises. Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam is approaching this area where the shuhada is buried, where his father is buried. He looks at Jabir. Jabir is waiting for him. Yes. What does Imam Zayn al-Abidin say to Jabir? He repeats what his father said when they arrived in Karbala. He looks at Jabir. He says, Jabir, Jabir, ha huna qutila rijaluna. Jabir, it's here. This is the land that our men were slaughtered, our children were enslaved. But then he says something which of course Imam al-Hussein did not say. Yes. Imam al-Hussein did not mention. Jabir, he comes and Imam Zayn al-Abidin holds the hands of Jabir. He begins to walk where? He walk and takes him somewhere. When he sat in that place, Imam Zayn al-Abidin began to cry. Imam Zayn al-Abidin began to weep. Jabir wonders, where am I can't see my master Zayn al-Abidin. Where are we in Karbala? Is this a grave? There is no grave. I can't feel there is a grave. Yes. He says, Jabir, Jabir, ha huna sa'ad al-shimru ala sadr al-Hussein. Oh Jabir, it's here. That shimmer sat on the chest of Hussein. Allahu Akbar. Jabir is wondering, but this is not the grave of Abu Abdullah. Why am I being told this is where he was beheaded? He asks Imam Zayn al-Abidin, but why? Why is his grave somewhere else? You all know, yes, the hooves of the horses, they dug on the chest of Abu Abdullah. They pushed his body from one place to another. How many meters are there between the Qatlaga and the place of the burial of Imam al-Hussein, isn't it? That's why the return to Karbala was something that broke the heart of Ahl al-Bayt. Yes, they would remember that day they arrived on the 2nd of Muharram, but they had Hussein with them, they had Abbas with them, they had Akbar with them, they had Asghar with them, they had Awn and Muhammad and Qasim with them. But now they came back. The women rushed towards their graves. You know where Sayyida Zainab went? Yes, she went to the grave of Abu Abdullah. She cried. Then she headed towards the Furat. Allahu Akbar. Zainab had to go where? Had to go to the grave of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, her beloved protector. The poet says, it's as if she would say to him, my brother Abbas, where were you when Shimr slapped me? Where were you when they whipped me? Oh Abbas, I was looking for you when they placed us in dungeons. Oh Abbas, where were you when Yazid was poking the head of Abu Abdullah? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين وإنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم إلهي بفاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله Allahumma, we ask you and we beg you and beseech you بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين, grant us the shafa'ah of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, we ask you to grant the shifa to all mu'mineen and mu'minat who are suffering with illness, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. Ya Allah, we ask you to help all those who are oppressed, all those who are going through poverty and difficulty around the world, our mu'mineen and mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Syria, in different parts of the world. Ya Allah, give them support, help and respite, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. اللهم عجل بفرج ولي أمرك واجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه ومن المستشهدين بين يديه، وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات ومن ماتوا على الإيمان، وإلى أرواح العلماء والشهداء، وإلى أرواح خدمة الحسين. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة but before it صلوات.